Trump slaps hefty tariffs on Europe. Markets plunge as leaders scramble. Headlines blared across global news sites. In a single morning, Trump's tariff bombshell sent shockwaves through financial markets from Frankfurt to Sao Paulo. Investors dumped shares in European manufacturing and agriculture, fearing a trade war. The euro fell sharply, and car makers watched their stocks tumble. Emergency meetings erupted across Europe as leaders scrambled to respond. On social media, #TariffShock trended worldwide as confusion and anger spread. Across Europe, leaders moved quickly, some with alarm, others with resolve. German Chancellor Baerbock called an emergency meeting. "We will not allow Europe to be bullied," she declared. French officials echoed her stance, urging unity and a coordinated response. In Rome, Italy's prime minister warned escalation could hurt millions of jobs. Spain and Poland worried about their agricultural exports. The tariff shock became a global event, with every capital city calculating its risks. The challenge now: would the West stand together or fracture under pressure? The sectors hit hardest by Trump's tariffs were clear from the outset. Europe's powerful automakers, companies like Volkswagen, BMW, and Peugeot, faced punishing new costs on every vehicle exported to the U.S. Already struggling with supply chain disruptions and the shift to electric vehicles, these giants now saw their U.S. market threatened. Farmers were also caught in the crossfire. From French wine producers to Dutch cheesemakers and Spanish olive growers, the agricultural sector braced for impact. Tariffs meant higher prices for American consumers and shrinking profits for European exporters. Many worried that small family farms, already battling drought and inflation, would be the first to suffer. Economic forecasts painted a grim picture. Analysts predicted job losses in manufacturing hubs, a slowdown in exports, and a possible recession if the trade war escalated. The pain would not be limited to Europe. U.S. consumers would see prices rise, and global supply chains would be disrupted. The stakes for Europe's real economy were massive. For automakers and farmers, the tariffs were not just numbers on paper. They were a direct threat to jobs, livelihoods, and the future of key industries. Inside the glass towers of Brussels, debate raged. Should Europe try to negotiate with Washington or hit back with tariffs of its own? Some EU countries, like Germany and the Netherlands, pushed for dialogue. Their economies depended heavily on exports to the U.S., making them wary of escalation. "We must exhaust all diplomatic avenues," insisted the Dutch trade minister. But others, led by France and Spain, demanded a tougher line. "Retaliation is the only language Trump understands," a French diplomat argued. Southern and Eastern European countries, fearing for their farmers, leaned toward solidarity but worried about the impact on broader EU-US relations. Behind closed doors, the European Commission struggled to reconcile these differences. National interests clashed with the need for a common approach. The risk was clear: a divided Europe would be weak, unable to influence Washington or protect its own industries. Every hour of indecision made Europe's position harder. The world was watching to see if the EU could overcome its old divisions or fall victim to them once again. Trade experts stepped into the fray, offering analysis and advice. Claudia Schmucker, a leading German trade strategist, warned that negotiation might buy time, but Europe needed to prepare for a long fight. She put it plainly: Trump's tactics are unpredictable. Europe must show strength and unity, or risk being picked apart. Alberto Rizzi, an Italian economist, emphasized the dangers of retaliation. He argued, escalation could hurt everyone, but especially Europe's smaller economies. We need smart, targeted responses, not just tit-for-tat tariffs. Both experts agreed. This was a turning point for Europe's global trade strategy. Think tanks and academic panels debated options late into the night. Should Europe file a complaint with the World Trade Organization? Should it seek new trade alliances in Asia, Africa, or South America? The questions were urgent, and honestly, the answers were far from clear. Experts warned that Europe had little time to act. The choice now was whether to lead, follow, or risk being sidelined in the New World Order. If there was one thing all sides agreed on, it was the need for unity. But achieving it was another matter. The EU's decision-making process is slow and complex, requiring agreement among 27 countries with very different economies and interests. Some wanted quick action, others urged caution. National leaders faced domestic pressures. German politicians worried about jobs in the auto industry. French farmers threatened protests if Paris did not act. Smaller countries like Portugal and Finland looked to Brussels for leadership, afraid of being left behind. The challenge was to forge a response that was both strong and inclusive. Behind the scenes, diplomats worked around the clock, drafting compromise proposals and seeking common ground. The European Parliament called for an extraordinary session, with members demanding transparency and accountability. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a sense of determination. In the end, Europe's greatest strength, its diversity, was also its greatest challenge. Only by forging consensus could the EU hope to defend its interests and shape the new global order. As the crisis deepened, Europe began to consider new defensive tools. The European Commission fast-tracked proposals for anti-coercion measures, aimed at giving the EU more power to respond to economic threats. These tools included the ability to impose tariffs quickly, restrict imports, and protect sensitive industries. Policymakers debated how far to go. Some wanted swift action to show resolve. Others worried about provoking further retaliation. The key question was whether Europe could act decisively without undermining its own open market values. The anti-coercion toolkit was part of a broader push to make Europe more resilient. New rules on foreign investment and supply chain security were under discussion. The aim, to ensure that Europe would never again be vulnerable to sudden shocks from abroad. Europe's leaders hoped these measures would send a clear message. The era of passive responses was over. But building new defenses would take time. And unity. The tariff crisis forced Europe to rethink its global trade priorities. Calls to diversify trade partners grew louder. Deals with Canada, Japan, and Australia were suddenly back on the agenda. Brussels launched talks with India and Latin American countries, eager to reduce dependence on the US market. Business leaders urged governments to speed up these efforts. "Our future cannot depend on one unpredictable partner," said the CEO of a major German carmaker. European companies began scouting for new suppliers and customers outside the US, hoping to cushion the blow of tariffs. At the same time, the EU invested in innovation and green technology, seeking to boost competitiveness. New funding for research, digitalization, and energy independence aimed to strengthen Europe's position in a changing world. Diversifying trade was not easy, but for Europe, it was now a necessity, not just a strategy. Europe stood at a crossroads. The tariff crisis exposed the fragility of old alliances and the risks of economic dependence. Leaders faced a difficult choice: prioritize unity, strive for greater independence, or try to balance both in a divided world. The stakes were about more than economics. Security, sovereignty, and the future of the transatlantic partnership were all on the line. Some argued that Europe must stand firm, even if it meant short-term pain. Others warned that breaking with the US could weaken both sides in an uncertain world. The search for a new path was underway. Could Europe build a more resilient and independent economy? Would it find the political will to act together? The answers would shape not just Europe's future, but the future of global trade itself. In the end, Europe's high-stakes gamble was about more than tariffs. It was about defining its place in a world where old certainties no longer held, and where the next move could change everything.